October 18, 1943, 27,000 feet above the industrial heart of Nazi Germany. The air was thin enough to freeze a man's breath in his lungs. Inside the cramped tail section of a B-17 flying fortress named Memphis Belle's Revenge, Staff Sergeant Tommy Kowalski pressed his face against the plexiglass, scanning the sky through crosshairs that had failed him 3 times that morning. His fingers were numb despite thick leather gloves. The twin 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the tail turret were loaded, primed, and ready. But ready for what? He couldn't hit anything. Below, the German countryside rolled past in patches of brown and gray. Above, contrails from the bomber formation stretched across the sky like chalk lines on a blackboard. And somewhere behind them, closing fast, came the Messerschmitts. Tommy had heard them on the radio chatter. 6, maybe 8 fighters climbing hard, hunting for stragglers. His B-17 wasn't exactly a straggler, but it wasn't keeping perfect formation either. Engine number 3 was running rough, throwing black smoke, and the pilot was working overtime just to maintain altitude. Tommy swiveled the tail guns left, then right, practicing his tracking motion for the 100th time that week. The problem wasn't mechanical. The guns worked fine. The ammunition was fresh. The turret rotated smoothly. The problem was him. Or more specifically, the problem was what he couldn't see. The tail gunner's position in a B-17 was both the most important and the most impossible job in the crew. You were the last line of defense against enemy fighters attacking from behind. You had the best field of fire, the clearest view, and the heaviest responsibility, but you also had the worst visibility. The plexiglass dome that surrounded the tail turret was curved, thick, and constantly fogged with condensation. Scratches from flak fragments turned it into a spiderweb of distorted light. Ice formed in the corners where the heating system couldn't reach. And worst of all, the very structure of the turret itself created massive blind spots. You could track a fighter for seconds at a time, lose it behind a support beam, then find it again in a completely different position. By then, it was usually too late. Tommy had been flying combat missions for 6 weeks. In that time, he had fired over 2,000 rounds at enemy aircraft. His confirmed kill count was 0. Not because he was a coward, not because he froze under pressure, but because he kept shooting at ghosts. He would see a Messerschmitt diving toward the formation, line up his shot, squeeze the trigger, and watch his tracers arc uselessly through empty sky. The fighter had already rolled away, repositioned, and was now attacking from an angle Tommy couldn't even see. It was maddening. It was embarrassing. And it was about to get them all killed. Because the Luftwaffe had figured out the weakness of American tail gunners. They knew about the blind spots, the visibility problems, the split-second delays. German fighter pilots were trained to exploit those gaps, to attack in coordinated waves that kept American gunners constantly guessing. They would come in high, drop low, roll left, then strike from the right. By the time a tail gunner could track and fire, the fighters were already gone. But Tommy Kowalski was not a quitter. He was a 23-year-old machinist from Detroit who had spent his teenage years building engines in his father's garage. He understood angles, trajectories, and mechanical precision. More importantly, he understood that every problem had a solution even if that solution hadn't been invented yet. So while other tail gunners practiced their shooting, Tommy practiced something else. He practiced seeing. It started with a simple observation. During a mission over Bremen 2 weeks earlier, Tommy noticed something strange in the curved plexiglass of his turret. For just a moment, as sunlight hit the dome at the perfect angle, he could see the reflection of aircraft that were outside his direct field of view. It was distorted, warped, barely recognizable, but it was there. A ghost image of German fighters maneuvering behind his blind spots. Most gunners would have dismissed it as a trick of light, a distraction, maybe even a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. Tommy saw it as inspiration. That night, back at the air base in England, he sat in the crew quarters with a pencil, a notepad, and a clear glass bottle from the mess hall. He held the bottle up to the light, rotated it slowly, and studied how reflections moved across its curved surface. He sketched angles, calculated distances, and tried to understand the physics of what he had seen. The idea was wild, unorthodox, and completely against regulations. But it was also brilliant. If he could harness those reflections, control them, predict them, he might be able to see around corners. He might be able to track enemy fighters even when they were hidden in his blind spots. All he needed was the right equipment, the right positioning, and the courage to trust his own eyes over standard operating procedure. 3 days later, Tommy approached his crew chief with a request that sounded insane. He wanted to install mirrors in his tail turret. Not big mirrors, not obvious ones, but small, carefully angled pieces of polished metal that could give him a wider field of view. The crew chief laughed. Then he saw the diagrams Tommy had drawn, the calculations he had made, the precision of his planning. The laughter stopped. It wasn't regulation equipment. It wasn't Army issued. It wasn't approved by anyone higher than a staff sergeant with grease under his fingernails and desperation in his eyes. But war had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable, especially when American bombers were falling out of the sky at an alarming rate. The crew chief looked at Tommy's sketches for a long moment, then nodded. They would try it. The installation took place during a foggy morning when most of the officers were in briefings and the flight line was quiet. Tommy and the crew chief worked with handheld mirrors salvaged from the base barbershop, along with strips of polished aluminum cut from damaged aircraft. They mounted the mirrors at precise angles inside the tail turret, positioning them to catch reflections from areas that were normally invisible. It looked makeshift, improvised, almost comical. But when Tommy climbed into the turret and tested his new system, something remarkable happened. He could see everything. Not perfectly, not clearly, but enough. The mirrors created a network of reflected images that gave him a nearly 360-degree view around the aircraft. Enemy fighters that had once disappeared into his blind spots were now visible as distorted but trackable reflections. He could follow their approach, predict their attack angles, and position his guns before they even came into direct sight. The system wasn't perfect. The images were warped, reversed, and sometimes confusing. It took practice to interpret what he was seeing, to distinguish between real threats and optical illusions. But Tommy had always been good with his hands. good with mechanical puzzles, good at seeing patterns that others missed. And now, for the first time since joining the crew, he felt like he had a fighting chance. 2 weeks later, on a bombing run over Schweinfurt, that chance would be tested in the most violent and decisive way possible. Because the Luftwaffe was coming and they were bringing everything they had, the first test came sooner than expected. October 20th, 1943. The target was Düren, a railway junction 30 miles southwest of Cologne. The mission briefing had been routine, almost boring. Light flak expected minimal fighter resistance. A milk run compared to the hell of Schweinfurt or Regensburg. Tommy sat in the tail turret as Memphis Belle's Revenge climbed through 10,000 feet, testing his mirror system for what he hoped would be a quiet training flight. The mirrors caught morning sunlight and threw fractured rainbows across the turret walls. In the curved reflection of the largest mirror mounted just above his left shoulder, Tommy could see the ghostly outline of their escort fighters, P-47 Thunderbolts weaving back and forth above the bomber formation. In the smaller mirror angled near his right knee, he watched the tail section of another B-17 maintaining formation 200 yards behind them. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. Then the radio crackled with tension. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, coming down fast. Tommy swiveled his guns toward the front of the aircraft, useless from his position, but his eyes stayed glued to the mirrors. That was when he saw them, not directly, not through the main plexiglass, but reflected in the barbershop mirror mounted at eye level. 3 dark shapes diving from the sun, still miles away but closing with the deadly patience of hunting wolves. The Messerschmitts were using classic Luftwaffe tactics, approaching from the front where the B-17's nose guns could engage them, then rolling under the formation to attack from below and behind where most tail gunners lost them completely. But Tommy could see their entire approach in his network of reflections. He watched them dive, watched them level off beneath the bombers, watched them begin their climbing turn toward Memphis Belle's Revenge. His heart hammered against his ribs. His breath fogged the inside of his oxygen mask. This was it, the moment everything would be tested. Not just his mirror system, but his ability to trust what he was seeing, to fire at targets that existed only as distorted images in polished metal. The first Messerschmitt appeared in his lower mirror, inverted, warped, but unmistakably real. Tommy tracked its movement, calculating speed and distance by instinct rather than training. The German pilot was good, experienced. He approached in a shallow S-curve that would normally keep him in a tail gunner's blind spot until the last possible second. But Tommy could see him coming, could follow his entire approach through multiple mirror angles. When the Messerschmitt finally rolled into direct view, Tommy was already waiting. His guns were trained, his trigger finger steady, his breathing controlled. The twin .50 calibers erupted in a sustained burst that shook the entire tail section. Tracers arced through the thin air, not where the fighter was, but where it was going to be. Tommy led the target perfectly, firing into empty sky with absolute confidence. The Messerschmitt flew directly into the stream of bullets. Metal sparked, glass shattered. Smoke poured from the engine cowling. The fighter rolled away, trailing fire, and disappeared into the clouds below. Tommy's first confirmed kill, but there wasn't time to celebrate. Two more Messerschmitts were climbing toward them, visible in his mirrors long before they would appear in normal sight. He tracked them through his reflection system, watching their approach like a chess player studying the board 3 moves ahead. When they split apart to attack from different angles, Tommy was ready for that too. The second fighter came from below and to the left, exactly where Tommy expected him. This time he fired in shorter bursts, conserving ammunition, placing his shots with surgical precision. The Messerschmitt's canopy exploded in a shower of plexiglass. The aircraft rolled inverted and dove away, the pilot either dead or unconscious. The third fighter, seeing his wingman destroyed, broke off the attack and fled toward the German border. In less than 3 minutes, Tommy Kowalski had transformed from the squadron's worst tail gunner into its most effective defender. Word spread quickly through the bomber formation. Other crews had watched the engagement, had seen the impossible accuracy of Memphis Belle's Revenge's tail guns. By the time they returned to base, Tommy's mirror system had become the most talked about innovation in the 8th Air Force. But success brought scrutiny. Within hours of landing, Tommy found himself standing at attention in front of Colonel Harrison, the group commander, trying to explain why his tail turret looked like a funhouse. The mirrors caught fluorescent light from the hangar and threw dancing patterns across the concrete floor. To most observers, it looked like the work of a madman, a desperate improvisation by a gunner who had lost his nerve. Colonel Harrison was not most observers. He was a veteran pilot who had flown combat missions over France, a man who understood that war rewarded innovation over regulation. He climbed into the tail turret himself, positioned himself behind the guns, and spent 20 minutes studying Tommy's mirror arrangement. He tested different angles, observed how reflections moved as he swiveled the turret, began to understand the genius of what he was seeing. "This is not standard equipment, Sergeant," Harrison said finally. Tommy's stomach dropped. He expected court-martial, expected to be grounded, expected his brief moment of success to end in disgrace. Instead, Harrison smiled. "This is better than standard equipment. How soon can you train other gunners to use it?" The answer was complicated. The mirror system wasn't just about hardware. It was about learning to see in a completely new way. It required spatial intelligence, the ability to interpret reversed and distorted images, the confidence to fire at targets that existed only in reflection. Not every gunner could master it, but the ones who could became legends. Tommy spent the next week training volunteers from other crews, teaching them how to read the mirrors, how to track targets through multiple reflections, how to trust their eyes when their instincts said otherwise. Some picked it up immediately. Others struggled for days before achieving the breakthrough moment when the system suddenly made sense. A few never got it at all, their minds unable to process the inverted reality of mirror warfare. But those who mastered Tommy's system became the most feared tail gunners in the European theater. Their accuracy rates tripled overnight. German fighter pilots began to avoid B-17s equipped with mirror systems, recognizing the distinctive glint of reflected light as a warning to stay clear. The innovation spread from crew to crew, from squadron to squadron, from group to group. By November of 1943, nearly every B-17 in the 8th Air Force carried some version of Tommy's mirror array. The specifications varied, the quality differed, but the principle remained the same. See around corners, track the invisible, turn blind spots into killing fields. It was battlefield innovation at its finest, born from desperation and perfected through combat. The Luftwaffe noticed the change immediately. Their kill rates against American bombers began to drop. Experienced pilots reported that Allied tail gunners seemed to have developed supernatural awareness, firing at targets they shouldn't have been able to see. German intelligence investigated captured damaged B-17s, studied the mirror installations with growing alarm. They had no counter for it because the system was fundamentally defensive, designed to level the playing field rather than gain an unfair advantage. Tommy Kowalski had simply figured out how to see what was already there, hidden in plain sight by the limitations of standard equipment and conventional thinking. His mirrors didn't create new capabilities, they revealed capabilities that had always existed. The mirrors weren't just changing individual battles, they were rewriting the mathematics of bomber warfare. Before Tommy's innovation, B-17 tail gunners averaged 1 confirmed kill for every 800 rounds fired. After the mirror system spread through the 8th Air Force, that ratio improved to 1 kill for every 260 rounds. It wasn't just about accuracy. It was about survival. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was the second gunner to master Tommy's system. A former auto mechanic from San Antonio, Rodriguez had the spatial awareness needed to interpret reflected images, but he also had something else: patience. While other gunners blazed away at the first sign of enemy aircraft, Rodriguez used his mirrors to study German attack patterns, learning to predict their movements before they made them. On November 11, 1943, during a mission over Munster, Rodriguez encountered something no American tail gunner had faced before: a coordinated attack by 12 Messerschmitt Bf 10-9s approaching in 3 waves of 4 aircraft each. Standard tactics called for panic fire, spraying bullets in every direction and hoping to hit something. Rodriguez did the opposite. He watched. Through his mirror network, he could see the entire German formation maneuvering behind his aircraft. The first wave came in high and fast, drawing his attention upward. The second wave approached from below, hidden beneath the bomber's belly. The third wave hung back, waiting to exploit whatever opening the first 2 created. It was textbook Luftwaffe coordination designed to overwhelm a single gunner through sheer complexity. But Rodriguez wasn't fighting blind anymore. In his largest mirror, angled 45 degrees above his left shoulder, he tracked the high attack. In the curved barbershop mirror near his right elbow, he followed the low approach. In the small rectangular mirror mounted beside his ammunition counter, he monitored the reserve formation. For the first time in aerial combat history, one man could see everything happening around him simultaneously. The German pilots had no idea they were visible. They executed their attack plan with confidence, believing they were exploiting the standard blind spots of American tail gunners. The high formation dove first, exactly as Rodriguez expected. He let them come, tracking their descent through multiple mirror angles, calculating intercept points with mechanical precision. When the lead Messerschmitt rolled into his direct field of fire, Rodriguez was already there waiting. His first burst lasted 3 seconds. 50 rounds perfectly placed. The German fighter disintegrated, its wings folding backward like a broken bird. The second aircraft in the formation tried to break left directly into Rodriguez's predicted fire zone. Another 3-second burst. Another kill. The third and fourth fighters, seeing their leaders destroyed, scattered in panic. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. While tracking the high attack through his mirrors, he had also been monitoring the low approach. 4 Messerschmitts were climbing toward the bomber's belly, invisible to every gunner except him. As they rolled up to attack, Rodriguez swiveled his turret downward, using his mirror system to maintain visual contact even when the aircraft were completely outside his normal field of view. The German pilots never saw it coming. They were attacking what they believed was a blind spot, approaching from an angle that should have been completely safe. Instead, they flew into a precisely aimed stream of 50 caliber bullets. 2 went down immediately. The third limped away, trailing smoke and fuel. The fourth broke off the attack and fled toward the German border. 8 fighters engaged, 4 destroyed, 1 damaged, 3 driven off, all in less than 5 minutes. Rodriguez had achieved something that military strategists considered impossible. He had single-handedly defeated a coordinated fighter attack using nothing but superior observation and tactical patience. Word of the engagement reached 8th Air Force headquarters within hours. Intelligence officers studied Rodriguez's after-action report, interviewed other crew members, analyzed gun camera footage from escort fighters. The numbers were undeniable. 1 tail gunner with a mirror system had accomplished what normally required an entire squadron of P-51 Mustangs. But the real breakthrough came when they realized the psychological impact on German pilots. Luftwaffe units began reporting that American bombers seemed to have developed all-seeing tail gunners, capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously and firing at aircraft they shouldn't have been able to detect. Morale among German fighter pilots plummeted. Attack success rates dropped. Some experienced pilots began refusing missions against heavily defended bomber formations. The mirror system was creating a force multiplier effect that went far beyond simple mechanical improvement. It was changing the fundamental dynamics of air combat, shifting the balance from attackers to defenders. German tactical manuals, refined through years of successful combat, suddenly became obsolete. Attack patterns that had worked for months were now suicide missions. By December 1943, Tommy Kowalski found himself reassigned to a new role. No longer just a tail gunner, he became the 8th Air Force's unofficial instructor for defensive gunnery systems. His job was to travel from base to base, training crews on mirror installation and usage, refining the system based on combat feedback, developing new techniques for different tactical situations. The work was exhausting but rewarding. Every week brought new success stories, new innovations, new proof that his simple idea was saving lives. A crew from the 91st Bomb Group reported destroying 6 fighters in a single mission using modified mirror arrays. A gunner from the 384th developed a technique for using mirrors to coordinate fire with other turrets, creating overlapping fields of observation that eliminated virtually all blind spots. The system evolved rapidly through battlefield testing. Early mirror installations used barbershop equipment and salvaged materials. But by early 1944, specialized optical equipment was being manufactured specifically for bomber defense. The mirrors became smaller, clearer, more precisely angled. Mounting systems became standardized, adjustable, integrated into the aircraft's structure rather than jury-rigged onto existing equipment. Tommy's original innovation spawned an entire industry of defensive improvements. Engineers developed periscope systems for ball turret gunners. Optical specialists created wide-angle lenses for waist gunners. Even bombardiers received mirror equipment to help them spot fighters during bomb runs. The B-17 was transforming from a flying fortress with serious defensive weaknesses into a truly all-seeing weapon of war. The Germans tried to adapt. They developed new attack patterns, approached from different angles, used the sun and clouds to mask their movements. But every tactical adjustment was met by corresponding improvements in American defensive systems. It became an arms race fought with mirrors and mathematics where the side that could see clearest would ultimately prevail. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, a group operations officer, summarized the transformation in a report to Washington. The mirror system has fundamentally altered the tactical equation of bomber defense. We are no longer fighting with one eye closed. For the first time since operations began, our gunners can see the entire battlefield simultaneously. The psychological impact on enemy morale has been as significant as the tactical advantage. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the mirror revolution was its grassroots origin. No engineer had designed it. No general had ordered it. No factory had manufactured it. The system that was changing the course of air warfare had been invented by a 23-year-old machinist with a handful of barbershop mirrors and the stubborn refusal to accept that problems couldn't be solved. Tommy's innovation represented something larger than tactical improvement. It demonstrated the power of individual initiative in warfare. The ability of enlisted personnel to identify problems and develop solutions faster than official channels. It proved that the best military innovations often came not from headquarters or research laboratories, but from the front lines where necessity met ingenuity. The mirror system also revealed the importance of seeing warfare from new perspectives, literally and figuratively. For decades, military theorists had accepted that aircraft had unavoidable blind spots, that defensive gunners would always operate at a disadvantage against attacking fighters. Tommy proved that assumption wrong by changing how people looked at the problem, by finding ways to see around corners and through obstacles. As 1943 turned into 1944, and Allied bomber formations grew larger and more heavily defended, the mirror system became standard equipment throughout the European theater. What had begun as one desperate gunner's improvised solution had evolved into an essential component of American air power. The B-17 Flying Fortress, already legendary for its ruggedness and firepower, gained a new reputation for all-seeing defensive capability. German fighter pilots began calling American bombers the mirror birds, aircraft that seemed to have eyes in the back of their heads. Some Luftwaffe units reported that approaching Allied formations from any angle had become virtually suicidal. The psychological warfare aspect of the mirror system proved as valuable as its tactical benefits, creating hesitation and fear among enemy pilots who could no longer rely on surprise attacks. The innovation continued spreading beyond heavy bombers. B-24 Liberator crews adapted the system for their aircraft. Fighter squadrons experimented with mirror arrays for formation flying and defensive maneuvering. Transport pilots used simplified versions to watch for enemy interceptors. Even ground personnel found applications for the observational techniques Tommy had developed. By February 1944, the mirror system had evolved far beyond Tommy's original barbershop equipment. Engineering units at bases across England were producing standardized optical arrays, precision-mounted and calibrated for maximum effectiveness. But with success came bureaucracy. Military procurement officers wanted specifications, testing protocols, official documentation. What had been a flexible, adaptable innovation was in danger of becoming rigid regulation. Tommy found himself caught between two worlds. On one side were the engineers and officers who wanted to codify his system, turn it into official doctrine with proper manuals and training procedures. On the other side were the combat crews who understood that the mirror system's greatest strength was its adaptability, its ability to be modified and improved based on real battlefield conditions. The tension came to a head during a meeting at 8th Air Force Headquarters. "Sergeant Kowalski," said Major General Curtis Richardson, leaning forward across a polished conference table, "your innovation has proven remarkably effective, but we need standardization. We need every gunner using the same equipment, following the same procedures." Tommy glanced around the room at the collection of brass and clipboard-carrying staff officers. None of them had ever fired a shot in anger, never felt the terror of watching enemy fighters close in while fumbling with frozen gun mechanisms. "With respect, sir," Tommy replied, "the system works because it can be adapted. Every aircraft is different. Every mission is different. If we lock it down to one configuration, we lose what makes it effective." The room fell silent. Staff officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. An enlisted man was politely disagreeing with General Officer Doctrine, something that rarely happened in military conference rooms. Richardson studied Tommy for a long moment. "What do you propose?" Tommy pulled out a worn notebook, the same one he had used to sketch his original mirror calculations. "Let me keep training crews directly. Let them experiment, modify, improve the system based on what they encounter. Collect their feedback and incorporate the best ideas. Keep it alive instead of turning it into another regulation nobody follows." The compromise they reached was unusual for military bureaucracy. Tommy would retain authority over mirror system development and training, but he would also work with engineering units to standardize the most successful innovations. It was a hybrid approach that preserved flexibility while ensuring quality control. More importantly, it recognized that some military innovations were too important to be strangled by standard procurement procedures. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. By spring 1944, B-17 tail gunners equipped with advanced mirror systems were achieving accuracy rates that defied statistical analysis. Some crews reported kill ratios approaching 50%, numbers that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. German fighter losses over the Reich reached unsustainable levels, forcing the Luftwaffe to fundamentally rethink their interceptor tactics. But Tommy's greatest innovation wasn't technical, it was educational. He developed training methods that taught gunners to think in 3 dimensions, to visualize aerial combat as a complex geometric problem rather than a series of random encounters. His students learned to read reflections like text, to interpret distorted images with the same confidence they once reserved for direct observation. Most importantly, they learned to trust their enhanced vision even when their instincts screamed otherwise. The psychological transformation was as significant as the tactical one. Tail gunners who had once felt helpless and isolated now operated with confidence bordering on aggression. They knew they could see enemy fighters long before being detected, could track multiple targets simultaneously, could engage attackers from angles that should have been impossible. The hunted had become hunters, and German pilots quickly learned to avoid aircraft with the telltale glint of mirror arrays. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez became the first female gunner to master Tommy's system. Assigned to a transport squadron ferrying supplies to resistance fighters in occupied France, she faced different challenges than heavy bomber crews. Her aircraft flew low and slow, perfect targets for German interceptors. Traditional defensive tactics relied on speed and altitude, neither of which transport planes possessed. But with mirrors, Gonzalez could see attackers approaching from any direction, giving her precious seconds to prepare defensive fire. On March 15, 1944, her C-47 transport was jumped by 4 Focke-Wulf 190s while approaching a clandestine airfield in southern France. The German fighters expected an easy kill, a slow-moving transport with minimal defensive armament. Instead, they encountered Gonzalez's mirror-enhanced gunnery. She tracked all 4 attackers through her optical array, engaging each one as it entered her field of fire. 2 went down immediately. The other 2 broke off their attack and fled. Her success proved that the mirror system wasn't limited to heavy bombers or specific aircraft types. Any defensive position could benefit from enhanced observation. Any gunner could learn to see around corners. The innovation began spreading to other branches of military service. Tank crews experimented with mirror systems for spotting infantry attacks. Anti-aircraft gunners used optical arrays to track high-altitude bombers. Even infantry units found applications for enhanced observation techniques in urban combat. Tommy Kowalski never asked to revolutionize air warfare. He just wanted to see what was coming before it killed him. With nothing but barbershop mirrors and stubborn ingenuity, he transformed bomber defense from blind desperation into calculated precision. His simple innovation saved countless lives, changed the mathematics of aerial combat, and proved that the best solutions often come from the front lines where necessity meets determination. Sometimes the difference between victory and defeat isn't found in factories or headquarters, but in the hands of one man who refuses to accept that problems can't be solved.